Yuan is the highest grade of otaku, which is just code for miserable loser. On his way to a convention, he gets transported to a new world with monsters, magic, and sunderers. He immediately thinks he's about to get hit, with the usual harem king status, but his charms only attract an old man, who tells him about the country's entrance test. The test determines how much magic a person has, so Juan confidently steps forward, expecting to be the secret demon lord or something, but he becomes the laughingstock of the town when they discover he barely has any magic. Later, the old man finds him, and he is not surprised that he was deemed worthless, so he offers him a job as his gardener. One day while Yuan was out with his weeds, he overhears two simps giving a woman some of that harem treatment he had hoped for. She spots him and orders her men slaves to catch him. But when she gets close enough to his face, she realizes he's not worth using her ice finger on. Later, the man finds Juan in a midlife crisis, so he tells him the secret most powerful magic in the world: fairies. The man hands him a fairy seed that he has never been able to grow, and Juan feels his luck is finally about to change. However, despite everything he throws at it, the seed never grows. His last resort is giving it a drop of his blood, and though it glows, nothing else happens. Later, he goes back to the forest and discovers the same woman with her lapdogs, but it turns out she's actually a vampire and uses the men as a blood smoothie. Yuan knows he's screwed and tries to run for his life, but unfortunately, she captures him and stabs him through the heart. However, this finally activates the seed, and a fairy named Molfe appears, which makes him think he was just a late bloomer, till she tells him she came from hell just to take his life. When Molfe sees he's already about to die, she defeats the vampire instantly and exchanges her life with Juan's. When Juan wakes up, he thanks her for the save, but she says she only saved him so she could take him out herself. To her surprise, all of her attempts only end up hurting her, and she wonders what's going on. Suddenly, the chairwoman of the Shuoi Academy shows up and hands him a fairy guide that allows him to return Molfe to seed form. Later, she explains that the book will tell him all he needs to know about them, and he can keep it in exchange for joining her school and fishing out the vampire hiding in it. She throws 3 extra fairy seeds in, and they have a deal. That night, the guidebook comes to life and gives him a Fairy 101 class, including the fact that fairies are actually former humans, animals, or creatures. After the lesson, she attaches herself to his phone for convenience. The next day at school, Juan sticks out like a sore thumb, so one of the kids try to embarrass him by giving him a test crystal. But this time, he shows how much stronger he's become. Later, Princess Anhui visits with her bodyguard, Lori, just in time to watch Juan participate in a mock battle. However, when he manages to defeat the other boy, he passes out and wakes up in a strange world with a girl in chains. A group of thugs show up, hoping to make a quick buck off of her. So Juan refuses to let her go, even though he gets beaten up for it. When Juan wakes up, the guidebook tells him he was just in the fairy spirit world and saw one of Molfe's memories. He tries to talk to Molfe about it, but is interrupted when 2 vampires walk in to feed on one of their victims. While they're there, a knight comes in and reminds them about their operation later. Juan goes home terrified, and when he hears someone at the door, he thinks they finally come to him. So he musters up some courage and punches the intruder, but it turns out to be Anhui. He later pacifies her with some instant noodles, but when they hear more footsteps approaching, they decide to hide. This time, it really is Bella and Alina, so Juan uses his vine magic to hold them off while they run for it. The girls catch up to them, so Juan has no choice but to summon Molfe, who literally turns the place into a cemetery to prep for their inevitable demise. However, the mystery knight, who turns out to be Lori, shows up and takes care of the vampires himself, then goes after Molfe. When she struggles to keep up with him, Juan's guidebook tells him he needs to enter the spirit world to give her strength. But his spiritual powers aren't enough. Anhui offers to help him out in exchange for a lifetime supply of instant noodles, so she uses her magic to send him to the spirit world. There, he sees the version of Molfe that was a feared hitman. She meets a man with a face just like him, and Orlando Bloom. So let's call him Legolas. One day, Legolas was defending a helpless child, so Molfe held off the thugs since it reminded her of her childhood. In return, he handed her a rare sword, which seemed to impress her. Juan almost gets brain cancer wondering how Molfe can't see through Legolas's cheap tricks. Meanwhile, in the real world, Molfe out of options, so she uses a technique costing her her own blood to trap Lori. Back in the spirit world, Juan has nothing else to do but insult his combat lookalike, which surprisingly gets his attention. He tells Juan that this is possible because they share the same soul. When Juan asks him why he's doing this, he says it's all a game, and Juan's no better than him. But Juan refuses to accept this. However, since there's nothing Juan can do to stop him, Legolas continues to worm his way into Molfe's heart, eventually getting her to fall in love with him. He asks her to run away with him, so she agrees to wait for him at the tower. However, Molfe waits for 3 nights and 3 days, and Legolas is still a no-show. Her former boss comes to warn her about a trap being set up for her, but she thinks something bad might have happened to Legolas and fights through the ambush of men to find him. Outside, she sees the same child he protected some days ago being held captive, and she says it's already too late for Legolas. Angered by this, Molfe cuts through all the men, then runs to help the little girl, but she suddenly stabs her. Legolas later arrives with a group of men while the girl runs up to him fondly and tells him his plan worked. Just like Juan predicted, Legolas had made a deal with the bandits to take care of her in exchange for the sword. Molfe feels more betrayed than Mufasa and begins to cry bitterly, while the bandits try to pull an Uno reverse on Legolas himself. But he sends his fairy after them, and she wipes them out. Molfe's sadness soon turns to rage as he figures she'll drag him down to hell with her as she dies. But she's stopped by his fairy, who breaks through her sword. When Molfe reaches her limit, Legolas offers to save her if she agrees to become a fairy. Because of her desire to end the son of a bitch, she agrees, and he leaves her tied up in some thorny vines. Juan scolds him for being colder than Light Yagami, but Legolas assures him that Juan will eventually turn into him when he gets stronger, and leaves. Juan remembers that she was unsealed with his death the first time and decides to try it again to free her. He falls on his broken sword, and this is enough to wake her up and go to his side. When Juan opens his eyes, they hold hands and agree to face any trouble outside together. Juan finally returns to the real world and signals to Molfe to come to him. She merges with him, and he finally gets the SS rank he's been hoping for. He takes Lori on, but it's pretty much a one-sided spanking session that ends in a huge explosion. After the fight, Juan tells Molfe that they need to work on her childhood trauma, and she's happy that she doesn't have to pay for therapy. The chairwoman appears again and hands him 2 fairy seeds for a job well done, but says to keep everything that happened a secret. The next day, Juan returns to school, tired of carrying the anime on his back. So Anki and Molfe join his class as transfer students, which angers everyone else. After he heads to the library and collects books on growing seeds, which allow him to finally activate the new fairy seeds. Meanwhile, Lori reports his failure back to his boss, and when he hears about the fairies, he orders Lori to capture them and take out their master. After a week, the fairy sisters Lotus Frost and Yu Jian finally emerge from the water, and Juan can't help but nosebleed at their sight. He adds them to his fairy guidebook, hoping he can find the other fairies Legolas made and liberate them too. Later, Juan goes to visit the chairwoman, and she informs him that Lori leading an army of knights in their direction. But this time, it's not for Anki, it's for Juan. Juan figures they must be after the fairies, but the chairwoman kicks him out of the school along with Anki, since they're really not her problem anymore. On his way out, the librarian asks him to help collect more scrolls for the library and hands him a crystal to help him redeem rewards. On the way, they run into a talking dragon who threatens to take the fairies for himself, so Juan challenges him to a duel. The dragon wasn't ready for his bluff to be called so quickly, so he retreats and drops a flute for Juan to use if he ever gets in trouble and needs help. Later, the group heads to Lake Woody Hotel to relax for the night, and while they're there, the butler tells them the lake used to be filled with lotuses, till they've all of a sudden just withered all out one night. Lotus Frost suddenly walks away angry, and when Juan tries to comfort her, she admits she's missing some of her memories, and tries to attack Juan for almost making her remember. Suddenly, a couple of Lori's men appear, so Juan uses the flute to call the dragon and orders him to take out the trash. However, the dragon immediately sides with the men, so he can have one of the fairies to himself. With this, the two groups start facing off, but Juan ends up falling into the water, where a seal activates and sucks him in. When Juan wakes up, he sees Legolas, who tells him that a new game is beginning just as Lotus Frost walks up to him and offers to patch up his wounds. When she leaves, Legolas explains that he's in the seal, which is separate from the fairy herself and contains abandoned memories. Legolas tells him to do as he says, but Juan refuses to listen to him, so Legolas switches places with him and says he'll do it himself. He then fishes out the young dragon and offers to take him back to the real world in exchange for him finding out information on Lotus Frost. After stalking her, the dragon says she's trying to find a cure for her sister's disease, so Legolas knows how he's going to worm his way close to her too. Later, Legolas finds Lotus Frost and offers to follow her to the Y Cave to search for an herb. There, the menacing beast wakes up and tries to swipe at Lotus Frost, but Legolas pushes her out of the way in time. She's able to get the herb she was looking for, and they run out of the cave, but run to the edge of a cliff with nowhere to go. Lotus Frost tries to fight off the beast with a stick, but it goes as well as you'd think. After that foolishness, Legolas decides to show it who's boss and takes it down with just a flick of his finger. Then he hands Lotus Frost the herbs to try, but when they meet again, she says her sister still hasn't recovered. At that moment, he reveals that he knows a cure and calls it the purity of 3 incarnations, so she agrees to do whatever it takes. Days pass and Legolas and Locust Frost continue to meet while he slowly charms her and tells her how he feels. However, Locust Frost only focuses on curing her sister and even tells her about the man that gave her the prescriptions, claiming that he's an annoying pain in the ass. Her sister doesn't buy it for a second and decides to see for herself. She dresses up as Lotus Frost and goes to meet Legolas. Lord of the Riz takes her on a romantic boat ride among a bunch of lotuses. He reminds her that it's the same lake that she fell into, causing her sister to jump in after her. Unfortunately, though, they were both rescued. Her sister developed a sickness that stopped her from standing. Legolas says that he's glad she wasn't the one with the sickness, which shocks her. Then she suddenly passes out. Lotus Frost appears in another boat and tells Legolas to do what he can to save her, though he warns that her memories might be affected. When her sister wakes up, she wonders if the whole date was a dream and begins to cry. So Lotus Frost comforts her, but says she has to go get more medicine. The sister pretends to be Lotus Frost once again and goes to the lake. There, Legolas reveals that the last ingredient for the cure is the blood of the patient's relative, which causes her to cry. Back in the real world, Lori sneaks into Anki's room to take her out permanently, but she wakes up and is happy to see him by her side. When she hears the ruckus outside, she leads him to the battle and tells him to take out the men, but he charges at the fairies instead, leaving only Molfe standing. Back in the Seal world, Lotus Frost meets with Legolas and tells him to play along since his sister's watching. She laments having her own life to live, and she just can't give her the medicine, causing Lotus Cream to feel betrayed. Later that night, Lotus Frost tells her that Juan has confessed his feelings for her and that she wants to be with him too, but this only angers Lotus Cream, and she tries to stab her in the back. However, when she hesitates, Lotus Frost grabs the knife and helps her finish the job, leaving Lotus Cream no choice but to take her to the lake. There, Legolas always planned to sacrifice herself for her, but the only way Lotus Cream would agree is if she hated her, so they faked all those conversations to get the job done. Lotus Cream carries her sister into the lake and prays that they can be together again, so Legolas offers her the fairy deal, and Lotus Cream immediately takes it. However, something went wrong with the process, and Lotus Frost never became a fairy, while Lotus Cream ended up going crazy and cutting off her memories. Juan calls the bastard out on toying with people and determines to change their endings. He ends up at the beginning of the memory and now has to go through the same storyline, hoping he can change the outcome. This time he tells Lotus Cream about her sister's plan to make her hate her, and Lotus Cream assures him she would never. However, that night at dinner, Lotus Frost drugs her sister because it turns out that she's actually the one who's sick. When she carries her body to the lake, Juan asks for a do-over. This time, Juan skips through all the bullshit and tells the sisters the truth at the same time, allowing them to finally understand the other's feelings. Proud of his success, Juan brags to Legolas, but everything goes dark, and Legolas tells him that since this was just a memory, he only wasted his time. Just then, Lotus Cream arrives and tells him it wasn't a waste of time, since now he can change the future of the people in the real world. So she pushes him through a portal, and the young dragon manages to sneak his way out too. Back in the real world, Juan merges with Lotus Cream and returns to his SS rank form, taking out all the henchmen in the process. However, Lori came prepared this time and pulls out his dragon-ending sword to even out the playing field. It's a hard pass for Juan, so he merges with Molfe to remain the apex predator and wipe the floor with Lori. However, before he finishes him off, Anki runs to his side and tells Juan to spare him. The ungrateful bastard still abandons the crying princess regardless, which is why we don't give second chances. Afterward, Lotus Cream decides she would like to rejoin her sister and protect the lake forever, and disappears while Yujian thanks Wan for finally bringing Lotus Cream happiness and returns to seed form. Mofei reminds him that she's still banking on that free therapy and returns to seed form too. Wan and Anki ride back on the dragon, and on the way, Anki hands him another fairy seed she just happened to be holding. That's all for this video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.